Is here.
Yes, she's here. Hello.
Hi, sorry for being late. I was in another interview.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining. We were waiting for you, but no worries. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So now that we are all together, now I think we can start. So I would like to wish you, for those who have an evening, very good evening, and welcome to our high-level conversation in the shadow of Gaza, diplomacy, law, and the ruins of order. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Cultural Diplomacy Forum and ODAM. I would like to thank all of you for joining us once again for this webinar. And let me briefly introduce you the Cultural Diplomacy Forum. Our partner institution, ODAM, will be introduced by Professor Yeşilyurt in a minute. Cultural Diplomacy Forum is information, so we are building it as we speak. One of the founders is with us as speaker, Özge, and the other one is Samar Muharreb, who is the inspiration, actually, behind this whole idea. And she has a long background as an activist, and she runs her own civil society organization in Jordan. So what do we aim? We aim to foster peace, dialogue, and cultural cooperation, although these might sound quite common to you, the things that you hear all the time, and the inspiration or the aspiration of it might seem fragile given the international situation at the moment. I believe it is necessary. It's more than necessary precisely under such conditions, because today the violence spreads even more, public language hardens, racism, fascism, and all these isms are running wild. And in such moments, conversations like these actually will help. It will not remove the crisis, obviously, but it will help us think more honestly with it. And tonight we're starting with Gaza, but we will not end in Gaza. Gaza is a site of immense human suffering, devastation, and dispossession, but it's also something more. It has become one of the clearest tests of our time, a test of diplomacy, a test of legal principle, a test whether international order retains any real capacity for restraint when confronted by unrestrained violence. And the Gaza does not stand alone, unfortunately. Its shadow falls across the region. The Middle East today is marked not only by destruction, but by repeated escalation in Lebanon, by tensions surrounding Iran and war, fragile ceasefires, and by the instability that increasingly shapes the whole region and has repercussions for the rest of the world. A part that makes it quite difficult at this moment is that we still use the vocabulary that seems both necessary and inadequate at the same time. We still hear the language of restraint, process, de-escalation, and dialogue, yet we cannot abandon them, and we cannot ignore how they often arrive after the catastrophe, not before it. We often hear that international law has failed us. That may be true, but there's a deeper problem there, because the law has also been set aside, narrowed, delayed, and applied selectively by states that invoke legality when it suits them and suspend it when it does not. That distinction really matters, because a weak legal order is one thing, a selective applied one is another. So what happened in Gaza, or what happens currently in Palestine, is not only mass destruction, mass murder, genocide. It's not only all that. It's also the systematic conditions that make life possible. And water, sanitation, hospitals, housing, energy, food systems, everything, environment itself. So this whole thing raises the legal and diplomatic questions. It asks us whether the norms we claim to uphold still carry force. It also asks us whether humanitarian relief risks becoming a substitute for accountability rather than a path forward. And this is why we wanted this conversation to be more than Gaza itself. It's also about the wider crisis that Gaza reveals, the erosion of legal strength, the limits and the uses of diplomacy, the exhaustion of inherent peace process language. And tonight, we are honored to welcome a very special guest. Francesca Albanese is someone I greatly admire. She doesn't know it. I'm telling it, I'm confessing it now. And she's someone whose example I deeply value as well. And some figures like her become symbols not because they seek that role, but because the moment calls them into it. And she is one of those figures. In a time marked by institutional retreat, fear, and diplomatic evasion, she's remained a voice of clarity, courage, and principle. For many around the world, she has come to represent something increasingly rare: moral seriousness joined in public culture, in defense of those whose suffering is too often met with silence. We are also especially honored that this is the first time Francesca is being hosted in this format by a Turkish institution. We are hoping to see her in person in Turkey soon as well. So that makes us, and this makes this evening a very particular significance for us. Thank you. Now, let me briefly outline the flow of the evening, and then we will start our discussion. So we will start with Professor Nuri Yeşilyurt. He is the director of ODAM at Ankara University, and he will introduce us the center and the place he will place tonight's event in wider context. He will be followed by Özge Genç, and then we will turn to Francesca Albanese, and then after Francesca, it will be Betül Doğan Akkaş, and then we'll take the questions. The questions will be in written format. I will take them and I will make note of them, and then we can let our speakers to answer them. So thank you very much for your patience and listening to me, and thank you for our speakers, and also thank you for all of you being here. Let's begin, and without further ado, I am passing the floor to Professor Nuri Yeşilyurt, Director of ODAM of Ankara University. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. So just a quick note before I start. I think in the announcement of the event, my title was mistakenly written as a full professor, but I'm still an associate professor. So anyways, Ms. Special Rapporteur, dear moderator, dear speakers, distinguished guests, welcome to this evening's webinar titled "In the Shadow of Gaza, the Regionalization of War and the Ruins of Peace and Diplomacy," co-organized by the Cultural Diplomacy Forum and Ankara University Center for Middle Eastern Studies, or shortly ODAM. So before we begin, I would like to give a brief background about our center. Founded in 2014, Ankara University Center for Middle Eastern Studies was established to carry out academic research and studies on Middle East and North Africa. And we maintain active contact and connections with other academic institutions, both in Turkey and around the world, and in the region, of course. And think tanks and Turkish policymakers and foreign representatives in Turkey throughout our works. So we also offer a specialized 2 years master's program in Middle Eastern Studies here at Ankara University. And some of our students are also among us. I can see their names. So it's precisely because of the turbulent dynamics we as Middle East experts study that gatherings like today's are more crucial than ever. And before passing the floor to the moderator, I would like to underline the fact that since October 7th, 2023, we have been living through a critical period, or a kind of turning point in the history of both the region and the world. So much so that, things that seemed unthinkable even 5 years ago are now considered both possible and probable in today's Middle East. And as people, as societies living in this region, we experience, witness, or deeply feel this reality every single day. So the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the direct military confrontations between Israel, the US, and Iran, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the assassination of top leadership of Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran, and the swift downfall of the Assad regime in Syria. These are stark examples of the previously unthinkable developments our region has been thrust into in the post-October 7th era. And today, thanks to the invaluable contributions of Ms. Francesca Albanese, Special Rapporteur on the Situation of Human Rights in the Palestinian territory occupied since 1967, and our distinguished speakers, Özge Genç, visiting fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs in Doha, and Betül Doğan Akkaş, assistant professor of international relations and vice director of our center, ODAM, at Ankara University. We will try to shed some light on these critical developments during these critical times. So thank you all, and I wish everyone a fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And now, thank you for your remarks. I will now move to Özge Genç. And Özge, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Nuri, and thank you, Samar, who is invisible here, but we owe her a lot for this webinar. Good evening, guests, colleagues, friends, and Francesca. Thank you for being here. It's really an honor to share this space with you, especially in your first appearance hosted by institutions in Turkey. To many more, inshallah. I hope we can hear you and see you more in Turkey. So this conversation today asks us to rethink war, peace, and regional order in the Middle East, in our region after October 7. And October 7 is a date that pushed long-standing structures of occupation, dispossession, and militarized domination into a far more devastating and visible phase. What began as a catastrophe in Gaza did not remain there, as our speakers also mentioned. Israel widened the war, the US backed and amplified that widening, that expansion, and confrontations spilled into Iran, into Lebanon, and into GCC Gulf countries, pulling the wider region into a more openly militarized and unstable phase. So what we have been discussing as the war on Gaza is now much bigger than Gaza itself. We are talking about the regionalization of the war, and we are no longer dealing with a contained conflict, but we are dealing with a regional condition. We are dealing with geographical, political, and moral expansion of what started in Gaza. And for Turkey as well, the effects of this widening arc are very immediate and tangible. I think one of the deepest problems of post-October 7 environment is that the meaning of war and peace and diplomacy and mediation has been emptied out. The old frameworks lie in ruins, as the title of this event suggests, not because peace is impossible, but because those frameworks were never adequate to the depth of occupation, the scale of asymmetry, or the speed of regional escalation. And war no longer looks like war in any restrained or minimally rule-bound sense. Political leaders, you name them, Netanyahu, US presidents, first Biden and then Trump, and their officials, they normalize destruction, the killing of civilians, and then rapid in procedural language. Peace has changed too. We see violence continues under diplomatic language, and diplomatic language survives inside ongoing violence. Ceasefires don't cease fires. mediators are attacked by conflict actors, as we saw in the case of Qatar, attacked by Israel last year. And diplomacy has become very performative without concrete outcomes and very much constrained by domestic politics, international dependencies, and competing interests of both conflict parties and mediators. And most importantly, all these ceasefires, peace plans, peace tables, boards of peace, they do not necessarily mean safety for people and communities, but they are more pauses. They often give hostile actors time to reposition or prepare for the next round of conflict. And we have seen this repeatedly in our region. And take the October 2025 Gaza ceasefire. On paper, it looked like a diplomatic opening, hostage releases, prisoner exchanges, increased humanitarian aid, and talk of technocratic governance. But large parts of Gaza still remain under Israeli control, and Israeli forces continue killing Palestinians even after the ceasefire began. And violence in the West Bank also continued at brutal levels. So this was really not a transition from war to peace. It was a tactical pause inside an unresolved war. And the same logic appears in the current Iran ceasefire. Only days ago, we had Pakistan-mediated 2-week truce to stop attacks and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which is the center of attention in the war. But almost immediately, it began to unravel. Israel continued striking Lebanon very heavily, and the scope of ceasefire itself became contested. Eventually, the ceasefire, the talks collapsed, and only to start again this weekend, I think. And no one was anyhow expecting the end of hostilities with this ceasefire. So we can say this clearly: ceasefires in this regional moment are no longer foundations for peace. They are actually tactical interruptions. And this brings us to the harder question: if more violence and expansion of violence are what regional and international order produced, then what exactly does that order preserve? And I think the answer is straightforward from the current examples. This order preserves power asymmetry, and it delays resolution. It allows some actors to escalate and to destroy and still negotiate from positions of overwhelming advantage, while others are asked to accept pause, relief, containment, and survival as substitutes for justice. We see this in Gaza, we see this in Lebanon, and the February US-Israeli war on Iran made it even clearer at the regional level. So here, let me bring Turkey into the discussion, as it was asked from me. This regional order becomes a central framework for Turkey's Kurdish peace process. The PKK disarmament process reflects is about Turkey's attempt to address a long-running cycle of armed violence shaped by questions of rights, recognition, and representation for Kurdish citizens. And Turkey is currently trying to manage a very difficult peace process in a very difficult region with multiple regional spoilers. Israel, for instance, is increasingly seen as a spoiler in regional Kurdish peace dynamics. So I argue that Turkey's peace process cannot be read in isolation from the broader transformation of what peace now means in the Middle East. And this makes the process both more important and more vulnerable. First, because the peace process in Turkey unfolds in an environment where peace often means stabilization, temporary quietness, or tactical pause, and without deeper democratic or inclusive transformation. And also related to our discussion, regional developments can easily become excuses for both sides to slow down, stall, or even spoil the process. Second, because it's important and equally vulnerable because it raises a fundamental question, which is, can conflicts move toward legal and political inclusion rather than permanent securitized management? The question here is, can PKK's disarmament that can end of arms lead to legal and political inclusion? We know, yes, security-driven steps, withdrawals, disarmament, and some legal measures may reduce violence, but they do not resolve core political questions of inclusion and representation. And this is where we are now in Turkey's peace process, which is actually part of the regional framework that I tried to explain. All I want to say is that what's happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Iran are not separate from the meaning of peace elsewhere in the region, in the world. These crises reshape expectations. They teach states, societies, and armed actors what ceasefires do and do not deliver. They show what mediation can and cannot protect. They show and this wider atmosphere inevitably affects how domestic peace processes are imagined, are negotiated, and trusted, like Turkey's peace process. So, should we worry? Yes, deeply. And here I can stop and leave the floor to Francesca Albanese, as her work insists on grounding all these debates in law, accountability, and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Özge. Thank you very much for your thoughtful remarks and for reminding us once again that familiar concepts such as ceasefire and peace do not necessarily remain stable in their meanings. And your reflections also help us to see that the language of dialogue carries its own history, including in our own country, Turkey. Now it's my great privilege to welcome Francesca Albanese. And thank you very much for once again being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Of course, I want to say first and foremost, thank you to my soul sister, Samara Mohareb, who has brought all of us together. And I also have to say that it's with some regret that I'm with you only remotely, because I've been invited several times to come to Turkey. And I have postponed because unlike other countries, this is one of the few places where you have an alignment of government and people against apartheid and against genocide. And I also appreciate the fact that, and this is not, of course, an endorsement of the Turkish government and everything it does, but I recognize that the Turkish government is one of the few who takes my criticism as it should be. It takes it, and then it doesn't destroy me as a person, as an individual. It continues to defend my mandate, despite the fact that I've had criticism vis-a-vis its policies, vis-a-vis its sports, etc. So this is something that I wanted to acknowledge in a situation where member states, particularly from the part of the world I belong, I come from, Europe, have proven to be better at preaching human rights than at practicing. This has been a time of great display of hypocrisy, and this is part of the problem. However, I would like to react already to what I heard, particularly the issue of the importance of words and what ceasefire means, because I agree, of course, with what was said. with one addition, the fact that I was just in another call before joining you, where I heard political representatives saying, yeah, but you have to admit, you shouldn't be that critical of the ceasefire, because the ceasefire has meant that Israel is not killing hundreds of people every day. Of course, now it's killing dozens, as if it was normal. And this is the thing that I find inhumane and unacceptable, is that the Palestinians can die. The Palestinians can die in the tens and in dozens every day. It's 2 years that we know that we have the social media circulating images of Palestinian men and women raped by human beings, metal objects, wooden objects, and dogs, trained dogs. And we still discuss, I mean, there are governments who still discuss with Israel as if nothing had happened. So again, I would like to situate my remarks against this huge question of dehumanization. But so, because I had planned not to speak before, longer than 10, 15 minutes, let me stick to the script. So there are 3 points that I wanted to share with you and then hopefully trigger discussion. The first is, what is happening in Palestine is catastrophic. It's catastrophic for the Palestinians. In the long run, even if the majority of them seem not to realize, it's catastrophic for the Israelis. It's catastrophic for people in the region. I mean, I've been saying that for 2 years, but really, you can go back to my statements at the beginning of my mandate. I've said it over and over. What Israel is doing to Palestine will not remain in Palestine and will cause sooner or later a regional conflagration. So it has happened. And honestly, I think that after the Gulf countries, after Iran and the Gulf countries, which are, I mean, having a situation which is somewhat imploding under the aggression of the US and Israel, I think that Turkey is in the line. Turkey is in the line, like we Europeans are in the line. And we seem, in Europe, our political leaders seem not to want to understand that. But let's zoom in how catastrophic is the situation for the Palestinians from an international law point of view, because then there is also this dimension of how catastrophic what is happening for Palestine is for the UN and for international law. But Palestinians in Gaza continue to die at an incredible pace and rate, out of fire, out of starvation. There are still people dying because of malnutrition, and most of them are kids. There are people dying because of medical neglect. These are kids, wounded, and elderly, so the vulnerable. And then there are people dying because of infections. In a few weeks, we have learned, and I know that the cholera is on the way, sooner or later will explode with the third summer of this. There have been kids who have been beaten, who have been attacked by rats in the middle of the night, because there is no possibility to protect the Palestinians. There is no shelter, and no shelter doesn't only means domicile in the sense all the possessions. Imagine everything you have around you, the books, the pictures, your records, your money, your valuables, everything you have, from the kitchen to the living room and to the bedroom, everything you have is gone. Imagine the Palestinians, millions of Palestinians in Gaza being processing this. On top of this, they are exposed to the elements, they are exposed to wild animals, they are exposed to everything and to infections and diseases which spread, while their space keeps on shrinking, because Israel is not only bombing and devastating and pulverizing what is left standing of their landscape, is advancing its occupation. So all this is despicable. Aid doesn't enter. There is that shame of the Board of Peace that is the lowest point in the UN history post World War II. Since the creation of the United Nations, I think that the Board of Peace and the resolution which paved the way to the Board of Peace is the most eminent disgrace, is the most disgraceful moment in the history of the UN. Separate to this, but not separate, is what's happening in the West Bank. The West Bank is, I mean, there was, in the West Bank, there was already an annexation ongoing since February 2023, and they weren't against it, and the silence against it. This coalition has announced the annexation, the de jure annexation of what remains of historical Palestine, starting with the West Bank. Is Jerusalem? It's almost gone. Is Jerusalem? There is almost nothing left for the non-Jews of the city. Very little, and even Al-Aqsa Mosque, the place of the symbol, one of the symbol of Islam, it's going, I mean, it's getting lost. And I'm not saying this because it should be only a responsibility of Muslim people, but this is just to say all the engagement that we have heard, it's mere rhetoric, because eventually international law protects all this, protects the Palestinians from annexation, from aggression. And this is the second point that I wanted to raise. This catastrophe is also revealing of the world we live in. Nothing of this is new. Not the rape, not the torture. The death penalty has institutionalized something that existed already. Israelis have right to kill. Israelis have right to torture. Israelis have even claimed the right to rape Palestinians in the last 2 years. So this is not new. The fact that it's recognized in the law is shameful, but it's a recognition of something that exists in the practice. It's a sort of what lawyers would call it's a consuetudo. It's a consuetudo, and this also tells us who we are as organizations, as member states, and as individuals. States should have cut all ties with Israel. Economic, military, strategic, political. No discussion with a state that maintains an occupation which is unlawful according to the International Court of Justice, whose leaders, particularly the Prime Minister, is wanted by the ICC for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And again, is committing international crimes like starvation, forced displacement, torture in daylight. And it's pursuing ethnic cleansing and territorial expansion beyond borders. Today, both Israelis and even US leaders, US political figures, talk of Greater Israel as a project that is totally legitimate. You see, this is the normalization of the continuity of Israel's unlawful regime. And the third, the other aspect is what we do as individuals, as organizations, as civil society, as academics. This is something I do believe that Palestine has also forced us to interrogate the very concept of power vis-a-vis international law, because international law cannot be blamed to be ineffective. International law is as good as it can be in terms of normative system. What is lacking is political will. Enforcement is failing, but what I can tell you, millions of people in the part of the world I belong to are acting, are striking, are protesting, are being fired, are boycotting and divesting. I think that one of the things, I don't know in Turkey, but one of the things that in the Arab region should become more common, more powerful, is what BDS is asking for, to cut the ties with the apartheid regime. Why there are still businesses, goods and services that are on the BDS list. And then also it's interrogating the concept of power in the sense I think that everyone has the power to change the reality. And this is where international law makes a difference, because I hear more and more people, especially young people, using language that emanates from international law to advocate against the genocide, against apartheid, against the illegal occupation. And this gives me hope. Now, what is needed is synergy and coordination. We need to have a clear objective. And for me, the objective for Palestine and the region is end illegal occupation, end apartheid, the objective, not the strategy, end illegal occupation, end apartheid, end the genocide, and make them accountable. And this is done through coordinated action. So each state must cut ties, each university must cut ties, each individual must cut ties in any possible way. This is how we disentangle from a system. And this is the last point I wanted to make. The reason why I have been sanctioned by the United States is not because I have denounced the genocide. It's because I have denounced the ties of complicity with the genocide. Until I criticize member states, no one has moved a finger other than threatening, harassing, persecuting me verbally. Where I was made a financial outcast with all the consequences that the sanctions have entailed is when I put a spotlight on the financial, commercial, corporation-related bank, pension funds, and commerce industry, arms manufacturers connected to Israel's apartheid and illegal occupation. This is because this is what activates people's power. And this is exactly what the system that controls the economy and the finance and the financial system doesn't want people to know, because the moment we know is the moment we realize that we have power and we can act. So this is where we are exactly in this precise moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this inspirational speech and powerful speech. You have indeed given us a great deal to reflect on. Me, as at least an international lawyer, I will think very much about it, and I would like to share your expression of hope about international law. I have my own doubts that make me doubt, but then I do know law functions when people want it to function. So you also told us about something about make them accountable. I think this is a very important moment, especially when you study the history of international criminal law. This is the first sentence that one should use, make them accountable. And I think there we can achieve what you were aiming for. Now, if you allow me, I would pass to Assistant Professor Betül Doğan Akkaş, who will give us the wider picture and widen the lens and make the region, bring our discussion to the region in general. Betül, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for our organization bringing this very timely opportunity to us. It's an honor to talk along with Ms. Francesca Albanese, and it's an honor to listen to her, but also it's difficult to talk after her. It's not only because of I do have this, it is a psychological resistance to work on Middle East while we know that Israel is killing innocent people, and this is happening not only for decades, but it's almost it's more than a decade. It's a generational trauma, and we are witnessing it now over social media. We have friends, colleagues, and it's difficult to try a way through politics and through academic writings, not to only understand, but also to announce the things happening and to declare a position against it. So my positions are mostly focusing on the regional aspects of the post-7th of October Middle East. And these are the points I have been writing and I have been talking through the meetings in the last 2-3 years. And the more we move in the regional politics, the more I see the implications of this regional atmosphere in our political calculations. My primary argument is, it's actually following with the base have done through the previous speakers. My primary objective is, or the argument is, there is an insecurity in the Middle East, and this is designed, declared, and continued by Israeli insecurity hegemony. So we have one big motivation, basement, reason for regional insecurity. And this is a case since not only with the establishment of a state, but also all this idea of having a Middle East for Israel. It is something, it is not something new. It has been there almost more than a century. And this has implications. There has been implications of Israeli insecurity, which led waves of immigrations, a lot of political, social issues in the region. But since the 7th of October, it has now moved to different forms of insecurities. The first one is there is an intra-Arab conflict when it comes to understanding what's happening in the Middle East and what we should see in the future of the Middle East. And it is not only limited to Abraham Accords. Abraham Accords is the is a sort of clearance for Israeli economic role in the region. It has brought a completely new reality and imaginary of Israel for the certain narratives of states, but it is beyond Abraham Accords. Now we have reality in the Middle East, which is proposing a region free from so-called burden of Palestine. Because what's happening after 7th of October, it has implications of insecurities across the region, even in the most stable, secure welfare states of the Middle East. So this so-called burden of Palestine, which is in the understandings of, not in the population, but certain political narratives, it came in a form that if we normalize with Israeli state, if we normalize this regime, and if we completely eliminate the idea of a free Palestinian state, then we will move a secure, stable Middle East. And this is proposing a region free from Palestine. This is my first reading of the regional politics. And it comes, of course, this comes with a second component, which is quite related, and which is weaponizing the narrative of mediation and peace. Since the 7th of October, we have certain regional states, including Turkey, Qatar, Jordan, Egypt, in different forms, international organizations, certain personals in politics. They did act to bring a sort of mediation and peace. I mean, when I say peace, when I say mediation, I know these are the concepts we should all redefine, revisit in the context of Palestine and apartheid regime, but it's because it is an international relations discussions, we have to use them somehow. But the current understanding of regional insecurity under the Israeli insecurity hegemony is weaponizing any form of constructive regional effort. If you are part of this process with a constructive model, then you are target of Israel. As previously mentioned by Francesca Albanese in her great remarks, this is something Israel is proposing to the world, not only to the regional states like Qatar, they bombed, like the current situation between Iran and the Gulf capitals, or potential situation with Turkey or European states, or even like blocking persons, academics working in US or Europe, they are all listed in the certain sanctions that they will be not able to have certain funds, etc. So these are all sort of weaponizing mechanisms of Israel and Israeli lobby in the region and across the world to completely change the idea of peace and mediation in this context. It is an effort to delay, completely delay our hope and effort for a constructive peace and constructive life, a potential political life in this situation. And this also prevents any further attempts by other regional states, because there is a third component. All this happening in the 7th of October, bringing other states to a regional insecurity under the Israeli hegemony in the region, it is completely distracting potential leading powers, their attention from Palestine. We were talking about Palestine every day, every moment in the last 3 years, in all the conferences, the television interviews, etc. Now everybody is talking about a war in Iran, Strait of Hormuz, economic capital of Dubai, what's going to happen with the LNG. Are we talking about Gaza like we did in 2 years ago? So what's happening in the region with insecurities proposed by Israeli policies is distracting the attention from Gaza, from Palestine. And this is going to change, of course, the calculations of policymakers, because their primary target is their, at least first, their existence in the political spectrum, then they will pursue the other attempts that are going to align with their political will. So, and the final insecurity proposed by the system is, it is all together, especially on the eyes of people, or on the understanding of people who are affected by this in the sideline. It is re-narrating the Palestine. So before, the Palestine itself it has been a symbol of resistance, a symbol of attempt to reach an independent state. We all admired the way they resisted since decades. But now the narration of Palestine itself and its resistance is more isolated from the Middle East. It is an attempt to isolate Palestine, an attempt to narrate itself as a reason of insecurity, as if Palestinians are not seeking a respectful, independent state, there won't be any issues, as if there wasn't any first prompt insecurity by Israel with the establishment of the state. The reason was only a resistance movement from Palestine. So this is a story re-narrated in the media, even in the academic writings, even in the conferences, or even in the narrative of some Arab Gulf states. They are all bringing the discussions of Arabic Abrahamic religion. There was no conflict between the nations. This is started by the terrorizing the resistance, etc., etc. So this narrative is completely changing the idea of Palestine in the region, which might affect in the global spectrum. So this can completely scapegoat the idea of peace, the idea of a constructive state proposal, and then we could ask how then we will reach a process of respectful peace. I say respectful peace because as our honored guest mentioned before, the current ceasefire is not a real ceasefire. It is not a respectful ceasefire. We should have a process, an era where we will see inclusion of Palestinians, their will. And this is where we need to see more collective action and collective idea around the Palestinian imaginary of Middle East, not an insecurity imaginary proposed by Israel. So these are two contradicting, of course, clashing points, and which is gonna win is, I guess, determined by time. But these are my 4 points defining the 4 insecurity component of Israeli hegemony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betül. Thank you very much for your contribution. Very inspiring, and indeed, again, from the wider perspective, we see what Palestine means, or what Palestinians, their resistance and their struggle means in a wider context. And indeed, you made the point of how these questions will change and will affect the process altogether as a whole. And then you do also mention the points that, how our span of interest or our attention drifts away very quickly from what actually matters the most. Now, let me briefly draw together a few main threads from the discussion. We also have some questions, but before we go to the questions. So how are we going to discuss these developments, or in what context are we going to discuss these developments? I mean, we've seen that there are attempts to sideline the United Nations. That's still the only international organizations that the countries are, in principle at least, equally represented. And also, how are we going to strengthen the fragility of the legal principles when they confront power? How are we going to accommodate the destruction of the material conditions of life, and including the environment, and also the places of residing, the places of the places that people live? As Francesca said, they are all open in the wild, almost like they're all vulnerable in that sense. And then how are we going to establish the agency of the people? What kind of what forms of accountability we should pursue, and what diplomacy can we talk about, or how diplomacy will talk, and with what language? Is it going to be the language of law? Is it going to be the language of law which could still serve for justice, or is it going to be a language of only humanitarian claims, or only reconstruction, or making the place a new place, like as it was proposed by the President of the United States? Now, there has been a few questions, but let me start with the first one that we received from Şebnem Sözer, and she is asking the question to Francesca Albanese, and she says, I'm quoting now, "You rightly keep emphasizing the necessity to uphold international law, so do we all. However, when the governments that rule and or influence the world do not have regard of international law, as we have all been seeing, and keep intensifying their atrocities, my question is, where do you see now the end of genocide and the end of all aggression by powerful states?"
I'm glad this question is asked, because I think this is really key to understand what I mean when I say that Palestine, the question of Palestine for me has become a lens through which to look at the world, and what I see cannot be unseen anymore. So I hope that my experience will help others. I tell my European fellows or my Western fellows, we have lived a fairy tale. We like to tell each other that we lived in perfect societies inspired by rule of law. It was not true. And in fact, the moment they've been put on a test, they have failed. Let me explain. In the sense, Palestine has put on a test fundamental freedoms in Europe, and freedom of expression, freedom of association. Young people have been beaten. Young people and elderly people, including really minors and people with disability, joining protests. They've been beaten by the police. So the police, who's supposed to ensure law and order, who's supposed to go after criminals, in Germany, in the UK, in France, in Italy, they have been beating protesters, meaning people who were opposing a genocide. They were just protesting against their governments because they were asking for the protection of for the real application of international law. So I say and people say all of a sudden international law has failed. No, international law has never been fully fulfilled. International law is a process that develops with humanity. But ask any country, anyone in outside Europe, ask anyone, I would say, but even in Turkey, or in the rest of Asia, or in Africa, historically, have human rights been fulfilled? No. It's great to have human rights codified, positively codified, because this is what gives us strength to act through the judicial system. And here is the second point. What has happened in the last 2 years, it's absolutely unprecedented. And you have to trust me, because I am a privileged observer. So I follow what's happening in Australia, in Latin America, in the US, in Canada, in other European countries. Legal action, strategic litigation is starting. There are, just today, there was the news of an action, that legal action that was taken against the Australian state, against the Australian government, for complicity with Israel for arms trade with, for complicity with Israel for arms trade. Germany is facing trial because of genocide before the International Court of Justice. Italy and the UK governments have been brought to justice. Again, legal action takes time. But this is why I say international law and human rights law are peaceful instruments. The road to the possible solution of the problem is longer. But meanwhile, while you use legal action, or look at the Hind Rajab Foundation going after soldiers, after officials who might have committed crimes. You know that there are Israeli officials who have not left the country in the last 2 years. Just last week, there was an official who comes to Italy every other month. It's not coming this time because the pressure is mounting. What Israel is doing cannot be hidden. Therefore, now the more civil society realizes the power that it has, not only to boycott, not only to force businesses into divestment, but also to take legal action like Oxfam, Amnesty International, and others are doing. Of course, this is not going to work tomorrow, but look at the Palestinians. I mean, as Betül was saying, they still resist. I mean, as I was hearing her speaking, I had the notification of one of the displaced people, a displaced academic in Gaza, a young academic who I've followed him every day for the past 2 years, him and his young spouse and young children, feeling horrible because I would love to help. And at the same time, I'm really unable to do anything concrete to shelter him from the brutality that has befallen his people. He's just published a book written on his mobile phone from a tent. So you see, the resilience of these people, as Betül was saying, is incredible. And who are we? From the privilege that our universities, from the privileges of it might be relative. I'm not saying that our life is easy, but everyone has problems. And at the same time, we have less problems than the Palestinians. Now, and this is the last point I wanted to make. And sorry if it was long, but I think it's very important that we understand what I mean by this is a test for our humanity and for the universality of rights. If the right to freedom is true for me, but not true for you, it means that it's not universal. And it is to operate like an osmosis. It will only be true for me when it's true for you. Today, we have to say, if it's not real for the Palestinians, if the right to, if freedom from torture is not real in Palestine, is a threat to me as well. And this is why I am obliged, no matter if I care about Palestine or not, doesn't matter, but I'm obliged to act because this is about rights. This is about the seriousness of the law as an instrument that is both a sword and a shield. And if it doesn't work for them, it won't work for us. This is what the Gulf country today, the situation in the Gulf country, the situation in Lebanon, the situation in Iran demonstrates. We need to be able to bring power under check, to bring power under the control of the law. These people who govern in the US or Israel, they are not kings. They are not emperors, even if they behave as such. So we need to use the power of the law to remind them of where they belong to, which in my opinion is The Hague. And this is why we have a lot of work to do. This is what international law is for in 2026.
Thank you very much. This is, I love to hear you more. Seriously, like it's so touching it to my heart. And I do agree, the rights would not mean anything if somebody else is not using it just like I do. And that's what the, for those of you who doesn't know me, I did my PhD on human rights law. So for me, what I hear is like music to my ears. But I cannot talk as the moderator. I wished I could, but I wouldn't. I have to pass to another question, which I will read. It is from Yildiray Oğur, and he says, the question is again for our guest, Francesca Albanese, and he says, do you think that the ceasefire reached in Gaza may have helped a slowdown in the International Criminal Court proceedings regarding Israel? Should we be concerned about the possibility of behind-the-scenes understanding affecting the process?
I beg your pardon. Can you read the first part of the question? Because I couldn't hear it.
It's all right. I repeat. Do you think the ceasefire reached in Gaza may have led to a slowdown in the International Criminal Court proceedings regarding Israel? Should we be concerned about the possibility of behind-the-scenes understanding affecting the whole process?
Very, very relevant question, which has two possible answers. I do believe that the so-called peace process, board of peace, ceasefire, whatever terms those in power are using, have managed to distract the global attention from Gaza. They succeeded. They really, because then, especially in the West, where those calling the shots are, you really have the media industry partaking in this sort of orgiastic denial. They keep on, feeding the narrative that peace is possible, that Gaza will be rebuilt. Gaza will not be rebuilt. Even I keep on thinking that they feed us with absurdities in order to cause what psychologists call mental and cognitive overload, so that we spend time challenging the Gaza Riviera, but we forget that meanwhile, we forget to act on the fact that Gaza is being emptied. This is what they want. They want Gaza to be empty so that they can create the oil duct between, that crosses the Arab region and that allows the US and Israel to get in control of massive resources. This is what the Gaza Riviera is about. And so I think that the most important impact of the so-called ceasefire is to distract the attention and let them, Israel and the US, but also followed by a cohort of other actors, and there are also some other Arab countries among them, unfortunately, to continue their business. This is what the US, this is what the ceasefire is for. I think that the ICC has felt is experiencing a sort of a break and an enforced pause, but not because of the ceasefire, because of the campaign. Again, I mean, you have 8 judges and prosecutors of the International Criminal Court who are sanctioned, and the risk of sanctions of the entire institution is real. I'm telling you, as a person who's living with the US sanctions, if I didn't have my family and if I didn't have friends, I would be desperate. I would not be able to survive. It's real, it's serious. And this is something, of course, because Europe is not strong enough to take measures to protect the ICC, because African countries do not act on their own still. We are still in this process of emancipation. And so other Arab countries, it's very difficult for the court to move on. Also, I mean, the ICC prosecutor is being kept hostage of allegations of misconduct. Now, I don't know what, I mean, I only know what has come out of the investigation. An investigation has cleared him from the allegations of misconduct. So why on earth, right now, European countries want to have the ICC prosecutor Karim Khan removed? So you see, there is a chilling effect that has been caused on the ICC, and this is intentional. Is to paralyze the accountability system. They paralyze the ICC. They paralyze human rights defenders like special rapporteurs, Palestinian human rights organizations who have been sanctioned as well, and now are even. You know that the head of Al-Haq, which is the most historic Palestinian organization, has been denied an entry visa in a European country. So you see, it's the level of corruption in the current, moral corruption in the current political elite in Europe is so severe that is contributing to the chilling effect around accountability and around the ICC. One comment I wanted to make, and is not strictly related to that, but regard Turkey. Turkey is no doubt a leading voice, a leading principled voice in this context. It's a respected actor. It has leverage, probably more than he knows or more than it realizes in Europe. And this is a moment where we need principled leaders. Pedro Sanchez of Spain has become a hero because of his stance on Palestine. But his stance of Palestine doesn't come from inside him only. It comes from the people, from the political pressure. I've seen people in Europe carrying the pictures of the Malaysian PM, Prime Minister, and the South African president in protests together with me. I'm joking. But this is just to say, because right now people, especially young people, want principled leaders. It's just a matter of time that this political leadership will be taken away. I mean, I speak of Europe, like by a tsunami of democratic renaissance. This is what we need. But at the same time, a country like Turkey has still much to do. I hope that it will join the Hague Group, because the Hague Group is the only political silver lining in this ocean of despair that the political ruling class represent. And happy to talk more about that if it's of interest. Otherwise, just Google Hague Group and what it is, and make sure that the government is on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I could say many things about that, but I will hold myself once again because we have another question. And this is from Tülin Daloğlu, and she's thanking us for organizing this event. And so she's asking the following question. Many people, I'm quote, many people now look at Gaza and conclude that international law has not merely failed, but collapsed into symbolism because atrocities continue while legal processes move slowly. As someone who continues to defend that framework under enormous political pleasure, how do you respond to the belief that international law is something powerful that states can openly mock? And what, in practical terms, would restore its credibility? But I know you answered this question a few times, but maybe you would like to summarize your points once again on how we can give credit to international law. Thank you.
Again, as I said, international law works not on its own, but when it's activated. It's this is a moment that where international law doesn't live on its own. Something that I often say is that it requires two things. One is ethics, ethical principles. We need to be guided by ethics, doing the right thing, ethical purchases, ethical choices, ethical investments, an ethical posture vis-a-vis what Israel is doing. So, is it? I often ask my detractors, can we agree that children shall be protected? That you cannot slaughter kids. I'm really, it has made me physically sick to see the starvation, the slaughter, the explosion, even the implosion, the burning, the maiming of children for 2 years. Does it really matter that they are Palestinians or Israelis or Europeans or Africans? Does it really matter? No, it doesn't, because all children are equal and all children are our children. So I say, let's start with these basic principles. If we agree that children shall not be touched, a state that has killed over 22,000 children knowingly with determination cannot be treated business as usual. So Israel, just for what it has done to these 22,000 children, without counting the maimed, the orphans, the traumatized, etc., only for this Israel should be held accountable. And this is why international law must be used, must be activated. This is why I was saying legal action is needed. But the other thing is that we also, I think, academics, as there are many in this event, academics have an important responsibility, especially those teaching law. You have to explain to your students why international law matters. It means that when they protest, if this happens in Turkey as well, this is something that flies so well with European academics. I make everyone feel guilty because I said, human rights are not for you to write important and precious, expensive books. Human rights are predicaments that need to be activated. So when they are violated, you need to be the first one to intervene. As professors, you need to be able to speak out, to participate in the public debate, to correct politics. You cannot be an intellectual in the ivory tower. I mean, it doesn't work like that. This is not the world we belong to. And this is why I say everyone needs to do the most ethical thing. And the last point is solidarity. So international law works if there is ethics accompanying it, but also solidarity means feeling part the humanity, feeling part of the human family. We are in this together. So there are times where we need to put our ego aside, our individual thinking aside. We need to unite the struggles. So this is why I say, in a way, Palestine is such a powerful feminist question, because we women, no offense, men in the room, but we women have historically been marginalized, abused, discriminated, and this continues. And for us, it's a every day is a constant struggle for emancipation. Learn from us, learn from our endurance, and see how we can together resist power. Because this is what Palestine is teaching us. We are going through another phase of emancipation. This is bringing us to a point of rupture. Fine, it will not be the first rupture in history, and it will not be the first revolution, but it is happening. And in order for it to be successful, we need to see it, and we need to see the role that we can play in it.
Thank you so much. Let me just say at least one little thing about human rights. Human rights are resistance. They are the rights of resistance. It's the right to resist. So let me shut myself up and give the floor to Selma Masic to ask her questions. So I will read her question. Ms. Albanese, you have often emphasized that third states have a legal obligation to take all measures to prevent genocide and unlawful occupation. Given Turkey's unique position as a NATO member with influence over the regional actors like Hamas, how can Ankara move beyond symbolic trade bans to lead a coalition of the willing that enforces international law, and to what specific legal mechanisms should Turkey champion at the UN to ensure that Middle Eastern powers are not just spectators but active guarantors of the Palestinian state? Now, we don't have much time, unfortunately, left, but I think this question deserves an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, it's difficult to stay in a few minutes, but what I can say is that this is a critical, as I said in my last answer, this is a critical and revolutionary time. It's about, there are so many people who have invested so much of their time, of their energy, and I want to take this opportunity to really acknowledge once again the people of Turkey, because look, in this moment of in this interconnectedness, we see each other, and like many people have looked at Italy, the strikes, the flotilla. We have looked, and others have looked at Turkey, at the incredible support that it has always given to the flotilla, at the fact that the government has been many years ago, the first to cut ties with Israel. Then, of course, the fact of resuming ties was not necessarily the best choice, but Turkey has generally done the right thing, and people when it comes to Palestine, and this is known. Now, when it comes to NATO, I'm critical of NATO. I understand the need for Turkey to be part of an alliance, but honestly, I think that NATO belongs to the past. That if we want peace, and I'm not being naive on this one, I really believe that. And then I will explain also, because I think that this is part of the new grammar that we need to strongly embrace as a humanity. Military force is what has led us to 1 and 2 world wars, and this is what is going to lead us to a 3rd world war if we do not use other powers. In fact, the most fundamental power we have is the power of our wallet, is financial power, which of course it's connected to extractivism, and unfortunately it needs to take into account the rapaciousness over natural resources. It's not just the US empire. There are other empires out there looming and wanting to grab as much as possible of what is usable in this world. But the NATO per se is the remnant of an old system, of the Cold War system, that today has become a way for Europe and Turkey, as by extension, to be subservient to US interest. And the wars that have started in the past 2 years demonstrate it, because I think it started with the bombing of Belgrade. The bombing of Belgrade and civilian objects in Belgrade. I always say it's matter of creating a precedent, and the lawyers among us probably will see where my concern comes from. But the moment you create a precedent, negative or positive, you need to deal with the consequences. And the fact is that NATO states, certain states as members of NATO, have often acted against international law, either individually or as a coalition. And now we are coping with the consequences of not putting limit to NATO. The worst that through the NATO have been either conducted or armed, including through the F-35 programs, for example, not only make us all complicit of what's happening in Gaza, but make us all tied to the logic that the US dominates within NATO, and we do not have the same strength. So personally, I would quietly start not necessarily playing a leading voice inside NATO, but being a leading voice outside NATO, leading, and I'm very happy to end on this note because I had forgotten this point, which with you in Turkey is fundamental for me to share. But by the way, you just gave, I was texting Samar during the webinar and saying, this only gives me envy to come to Turkey and to be engaged in every city where you will want to have me, to engage with university scholars and with civil society and with the government, of course. We need to have this discussion. We need a decolonized multilateralism. It's about time that we have a decolonized multilateralism, which is not just made of end of the veto power. It's made of universal values, universal principles. We build peace with peace, not with war, and not with investment in military and security systems that endanger human rights in our own countries. It just takes the wrong hands to get in control of this system. So we need to all work together for a decolonized system, or the decolonized multilateralism, that it will not happen without justice in Palestine, that starts at home, and will not happen without us doing the same, ethical choices. Now, before ending, I would like to really thank Modem University and Ankara University Middle East Studies Center for organizing this, and particularly Professor Nuri and CDF for this incredibly and beautiful event. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for your kind words, and we also thank you for being with us. I also thank all our participants, Nuri Hoca, Özge Hoca, and also Betül Hoca for their contributions, for their speeches. I hope this conversation helped us to think more honestly about what goes on around Gaza and beyond Gaza, what goes on law, on diplomacy, on the regional order, and our responsibilities and our strength, as Francesca said, our financial strengths included. So I would like to thank you all on behalf of the Cultural Diplomacy Forum, and also, if Nuri Hoca permits me, on behalf of Ankara University and ODAM. And thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much for your words. I would like to ask other Özge, Nuri Hoca, and Betül Hoca if they would like to say one last word before we conclude.
I would like to thank all the speakers. First of all, Ms. Francesca Albanese for her both inspiring and touching contribution, and also to Özge and Betül for their speeches, and thanks to all participants for their questions. And as academics, what we can do to resist these this truth regime that was constructed by the hegemonic circles is speaking the truth, actually. So this is what we try to do here. So thank you very much for your contributions and for the discussion.
Thank you, Özge and Betül, please.
Thank you very much for this great event. I think I want to just comment on why maybe Francesca has never been invited to Turkey, because
No, I have.
Oh,
Sorry,
okay.
I have many times, including from the government, honestly.
Yeah.
And I was saying I never came because I said Turkish people don't need me.
Oh, okay. So you're invited. No, I was gonna say you are right about Turkey's stance, Turkey's harsh rhetoric. Whenever Turkish policymakers, politicians find the opportunity from the government and from opposition parties, they voice up their pro-Palestinian stance and they criticize Israel. And I think Turkey was one of the few countries that put the blame on the war in Iran on Israel and Israel's uncontrollable aims for the region. But even so, as Turkish civil society, as Turkish youth who are in every survey you can find in Turkey, they from every different political inclinations and positions, they know what's happening and they are very pro-Palestinian in that sense. I'm just generalizing pro-Palestinian here, but there is the space for more activism is really limited, and we have seen a lot of protesters being prosecuted because of their protest in front of the energy companies and those companies who are doing trade with Israel and all that. So it is we all appreciate Turkey's stance and harsh rhetoric, but that rhetoric has to be matched with real policies and real debate in Turkey.
Thank you, Özge. And finally, Betül, please.
Yeah, I mean, just thank you for organizing this, and we are honored to be part of it. It's very nice to hear. I don't want to say motivational, but it is actually motivational because we need this academic, scholarly, love-based support to continue to pursue this decolonize, but also anti. I don't want to say anti, but it's more like we need to gather these people together to remember that we can actually do more, despite the fact that we are not the rulers or we are not the politicians who have the last word, but at least we can make some changes individually, I mean institutionally, then we can see some tangible outcomes for Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of you, and thank you very much for our participants. I would like to thank you once again, and also thank the CDF and ODAM once again for hosting this. And our time is up, unfortunately, but we are looking forward to receive the Ms. Albanese once again. And for the last thank you, I would really like to thank Samar for her idea, for her inspiration, and for her motivation to organize this thing. And hopefully we'll manage to do it in Ankara, hopefully, or in Istanbul, with a live program, and host Francesca Albanese once again. Thank you very much, and goodbye. Good night. Good evening.
Teşekkür. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Francesca. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.